Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to Macduff Lives. And it's Undo the Coup Part 13 today, where we talk about Operation Zipper, the secret conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. Martha Keith joins me for reading today, so let's go. And welcome back once again. And here's our good friend, my partner and wife, Marcia Keith. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, John. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for having me.
Well, Marcia, your reading has added a whole new dimension to the show, and I'm just delighted to have you back to help us get through what I hope is, I think this will be the last part of our reading and comments on Regicide by Gregory Douglas. But wow, what a big finish it is. This is Operation Zipper, which is the name that is given by, by Crowley and by the author Gregory Douglas. And I think Operation Zipper might have been chosen as a name because somebody couldn't keep his dick in his pants.
Couldn't keep his zipper up.
Yeah, might have been. Well, anyway, a little bit of resentment against the Kennedys for their, what everybody in the Secret Service and the FBI and the top CIA folks knew was a vulnerability that they were both very prone to
using their zippers.
Right. Okay. So good morning once again, everybody. And Marcia, do you have the text ready by any chance?
I do indeed. Let's see. And we are going to share. And here we go. So are we ready to get started?
Well, I just want to say that if you have listened or watched the last three of our parts of this book, this is really, I think, the culmination that ties it all together. So I'm excited. So let's get started.
All right. And the title of this chapter is And Everybody Else. According to a document found in R.T. Crowley's papers, the officially organized assassination of John F. Kennedy by the CIA had the code name Operation Zipper. This document, which is entitled Operation Zipper Conference Record, is reproduced in the appendix of this book and with the author's subsequent explanation of the abbreviations used in it. In the following, the events unfold between March and November 1963. The events unfolding between March and November 1963 are reconstructed using both this document and R.T. Crowley's comments to this author. Early in March of 1963, the matter of the actual assassin became a pressing issue. Because of Crowley's connections with a mob in Chicago, his father had been an important Chicago politician, parks commissioner in the Kelly Nash administration. He received the task of personally contacting members of the Chicago Mafia for advice and possible assistance. Chicago mob leader Sam Giancana, who had assisted in locating persons to carry out the CIA's murder plots against Fidel Castro, loathed the Kennedy brothers, but was far too shrewd to lend any of his identifiable men to cooperate in such a project. In 2 conferences in the Drake Hotel with Crowley, Giancana agreed to locate assassins who could be expected to perform in a professional manner. It was suggested that perhaps this recruitment might be better done outside the United States. Rather than involve the Sicilian Mafia, Giancana had one of his connections in that entity contact someone from the Corsican Mafia, the so-called Unione Corse. And it was from the ranks of this Marseille-based, well-knit, and very professional criminal organization that the assassins were found.
That's the French connection.
There you go. So if it's French, it would be, well, doesn't matter. Union Corse. The plotters' reasoning was that if the killers were somehow caught before the CIA could kill them first, they could only identify the Chicago Mafia as their employers, and the Mafia would never identify the CIA as the real moving force. If this question arose, the Mafia could much more easily be silenced than foreign killers could. Before the Corsicans were finally brought on board, a co-worker suggested shopping in Beirut, Lebanon, then a center of assassination professionals. The argument against this was that the Corsicans would have no problem blending in the background in race-conscious Dallas. Darker complexions, Lebanese or Arab professionals would certainly attract unwelcome notice in the provincial southern city. Cuban militants had been ruled out in the beginning as too volatile and inclined to emotional excesses. It would be Marseille then, instead of Beirut, that would supply the killers. Early March 1963, the director of the Central Intelligence, John McCone, began a series of delicate contacts outside his immediate circle. The first government agency contacted was the FBI. The first conferences with its director, John Edgar Hoover, and deputy director, William Sullivan, were held on March 4th.
Can I just jump in here and say I am so relieved that my father was not with the FBI when this plot evolved, and that he had already left in February of 62. So this is almost a year and a half later. My dad is at the Pentagon now and has a whole new set of duties. But, you know, like a lot of times when you think about Fletcher Prouty being sent to the South Pole on some administrative mission at the time of the assassination, you can think of my dad being sent out of the FBI in order to get him out of the way in case they decided that they had to take some executive action.
There you go. According to the Zipper document, the head of the FBI was permanently kept informed about the CIA's actions by his top aide, William Sullivan. Since Sullivan is described in the Zipper document as a participant in the entire plot, it must be assumed that the FBI as a government department was collaborating with the CIA to achieve the projected goal.
And I do want to just remind everybody that said William Sullivan died in a very unfortunate hunting accident before he was interviewed. So another interesting coincidence.
I didn't know that or remember it anyway.
Yeah.
Wow. What year was that? Do you recall?
I don't recall. I was trying to think, but I don't have that.
But it was shortly thereafter, if you say before he was interviewed.
Well, maybe I spoke too soon. I just know that he was one of those hunting accidents, you know,
right?
Like poor old Dick Cheney has accidents all the time.
Yeah. I was about to ask if he was hunting with Dick Cheney, but not seriously. Back to the book. On March 13 and 15, the next delicate contacts were made to Walter Jenkins and Abe Fortas, top aides of Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. According to the Zipper document, Jenkins and Fortas, and with them, of course, the Vice President, were also kept informed about the rising plot. Not a bold man, Johnson's concerns were entirely typical for him. He had forced himself on the 1960 Democratic ticket against Kennedy's wishes, and throughout the 1,000 days of Kennedy's presidency, Johnson was treated with contempt by Kennedy's people. Their favorite epithet was Uncle Cornpone, and it became common knowledge that Kennedy was planning to replace Johnson on the 1964 ticket. To accomplish this, Bobby Kennedy was preparing criminal charges against Bobby Baker, one of Johnson's top aides. Johnson was aware that such charges would give the Kennedy faction the ability to force him off the ticket. Since vice presidents traditionally have run for the presidency at the expiration of the mandatory 2-term limit, any hope of gaining the White House would have been dashed. Johnson, therefore, became a willing, if very timid, participant in the Zipper project. The two most important groups, the FBI and the future President of the United States, were hence quickly convinced to support the CIA. And then this quote from one of the documents.
I think this is a quote from the executive summary at the end of the book. So
Okay.
this is like Crowley's summary of
Yes,
of
the Zipper
Zipper
program.
operation. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So
As both the vice president and the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been slated for replacement by the Kennedy faction, their support for this project was practically guaranteed from the outset. The vice president came to believe that an attempt would be made on his life at the same time and was greatly concerned for his own safety. As the vice president and the director of the FBI were longtime neighbors and very friendly, the director has repeatedly assured the vice president that he was not considered a target and that no shots were fired at him in Dallas. LBJ was riding 2 cars behind JFK. And then back to the text of the book. There was, of course, another power to be taken into consideration, which could successfully prevent or reverse the attempted coup d'etat, the armed forces of the United States. To integrate the U.S. Army into their
putsch.
To integrate the U.S. Army into their putsch, the director of the CIA conferred on March 28 with James Jesus Angleton to coordinate the objectives of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States Army with the CIA's objectives within Operation Zipper.
Can I stop here? Because I think it's fascinating that he says the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. Army.
Right.
Because the Joint Chiefs of Staff was the combination of all the heads of services. And
thus the word joint.
That's right. So is it an error, or is it a signal to us that it was the Army that was the key service in giving the okay?
Good. Yeah, I had a similar question when I read that.
And Fletcher Prouty has interesting comments on that as well. So let's go on.
Okay. The fourth cautious contact was made on 9 April by James Jesus Angleton, Lieutenant Colonel Bevan Cass, United States Marine Corps, was U.S. military attaché to the Dominican Republic and had been involved with the logistics of the Trujillo assassination. Cass was later commanding officer of the Marine Corps Infantry Training Center at Quantico, Virginia. Cass obviously served as a liaison officer between the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA, as an entry on 14 April 1963 indicates, according to which Cass was recommended by the chairman of the JCS, General Lyman Lemnitzer. The fact that Lieutenant Colonel Cass, as a participant, in quotes, received a copy of the Zipper document that the chairman of the JCS was either directly or via Lieutenant Colonel Cass in frequent contact with the CIA regarding Kennedy's assassination, and finally, because the JCS is expressly mentioned as a, quote, government department directly concerned, end quote, in the Zipper document that had specific knowledge about the assassination, it must be concluded that the U.S. Armed Forces are the fourth big cornerstone of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and hence the overthrow of the democratically elected government of the people of the United States.
And there's your conspiracy.
Right there.
Right there.
There's the coup. That's the overthrow of government. That's what a coup is.
And of course, with Colonel Cass being a Marine, then that's not just the Army. That represents the whole Joint Chiefs.
That's right. In the middle of April, Chicago Mafia boss Sam Giancana advised Crowley that, I don't understand this sentence. Would you suppose that's a typo? Advised Crowley that or the job was $100,000.
The pay for the job, they've obviously left out a word which must be compensation.
That pay for the job was, that's probably what it was, that pay for the job was $100,000 per man, and there were 4 involved. The immediate overseer of the execution of the plot was William King Harvey, former FBI agent and head of the Berlin operation base of the CIA. Harvey was responsible for the construction of the famous Berlin Tunnel. Soviet intelligence was fully aware of this interdiction of their secure telephone lines in the Soviet sector of Berlin, and Harvey proudly garnered crates full of creative Soviet disinformation. In addition to this, Angleton contacted Israeli intelligence for assistance. The man he contacted was Amos Manor, then head of Israeli counterintelligence, the Shin Bet, and an old friend of Angleton. Angleton worked closely with Zionist organizations in Italy during and after World War II, and in 1951 had been appointed to be the CIA's top liaison with both the Shin Bet and the Mossad. Through Angleton's good offices, the CIA developed a close working relationship with both Israeli agencies, and in order to facilitate his plot against Kennedy, Angleton sought an Israeli agent who would oversee the entire operation.
Now that's kind of interesting and funny that Angleton thought that he needed help, and so he asked an Israeli agent to oversee the entire operation. Now let's remember that John Loftus, in his book, The Secret War Against the Jews, pointed out that there's strong evidence that Angleton had been flipped to the Israelis back in the 40s or 50s, and that he had always been, blackmailed because of his relationship with the Cambridge Five and his sexuality. So this is interesting that Douglas says that Angleton went and sought out an Israeli agent to, quote, help, unquote. That's very, very interesting. Let's keep going.
In actuality, the Israelis' sole reason for existence, as far as Angleton was concerned, was to make entirely certain that the Corsican assassins were removed as soon as possible after their work was done.
Mm-hmm.
The man sent to him was known as Benjamin Bauman, and he came well recommended. He had been one of the Stern Gang members, a terrorist group controlled by Menachem Begin, later Israeli prime minister, who had assisted in blowing up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946 with heavy loss of life. Begin was still wanted for murder in England, but Bauman had merely changed his name and went to work for the new state in an official capacity. This is the classical example of a terrorist becoming a freedom fighter. John F. Kennedy was decidedly unpopular in Israel because of his firm determination to prevent that state from developing atomic weaponry. A safe house was to be set up in Maryland, and there the Corsicans were to be killed, their bodies dissected and put into crab pots.
Ooh.
Gosh, that's a horrible, horrible image.
Yeah, how'd you like to eat those crabs?
Yeah, well, thank goodness we don't. You kind of have to wonder if that's a common thing here in Maryland.
With Crowley with William Colby dying, a mile from this point, right over there in the Wacomico River, a supposedly boating accident, quote unquote.
Right.
Nod, nod, wink, wink. And this is one of the big crabbing areas left in Maryland. So it's close to home.
Yeah, you could practically walk across the crab pots between here and St. Mary's County, or even between here and Virginia. Sorry, where were we?
Well, the famous soft-shell crabs.
The science of DNA had not yet been discovered, and what the famous soft-shell crabs could not eat was to be dumped back into the water. Bones do not float. In September of 1963, the visit by Kennedy to Dallas in November was announced, and the Angleton assassination plan now had a specific time frame and geographical location with which to work. The Corsicans would be flown to Canada at the end of October, met by members of the mafia, and driven into the United States over the Windsor, Ontario International Bridge. They would remain in a mafia safe house in the Detroit area and then be flown in a private aircraft to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then this quote from the DIA analysis. French intelligence sources have indicated that a recruitment was made among members of the Corsican Mafia in Marseille in mid-1963. French intelligence sources have also indicated that they informed U.S. authorities in the American embassy on 2 occasions about the recruitment of French underworld operatives for a political assassination in the United States. It is not known if these reports were accepted at the embassy or passed on to Washington. In the event, the Corsicans were sent to Canada, where they blended in more easily with the French-speaking Quebec population. And that from the DIA analysis. The Corsicans were under no circumstances to be told of the role of the CIA in their project. They always considered that they were working solely for the American Mafia and no one else. Weapons for the assassination were procured from Sam Cummings, CIA agent and head of Interarmco, a proprietary branch of the agency. This company, run by a British expert living in Warrentown. I wonder if that's a typo.
It's Warrenton.
Warrenton, Virginia, specialized in gun running for the CIA. It was an easy matter for Cummings to procure 2 silenced 38 caliber pistols and 2 7.65 millimeter surplus Argentine Army Mausers and a specially constructed .223 caliber rifle, which was cut down and modified from a standard NATO weapon. Special bullets for the latter weapon, filled with mercury and designed to explode when entering a body, were manufactured and accompanied the weapon. A check of CIA records located the names of several persons of interest in the agency in the Dallas area. One was Lee Harvey Oswald, the returned defector, and the other was a man with whom the CIA had extensive and documented dealings. This was the Baltic aristocrat George de Mohrenschildt. Born into the lesser Russian nobility, de Mohrenschildt had served in a Polish cavalry unit, the Promonsky Brigade, and after the Russian Revolution, he immigrated to the United States and acquired a degree in petroleum geology. He traveled in establishment social circles, spent a good deal of time outside of the country, and certainly worked for the CIA. He had encountered Oswald quite by accident through his connection with the Russian community in Dallas and became his mentor and, according to later CIA classified reports, his lover. When de Mohrenschildt passed on the information that Oswald had been hired at the Texas School Book Depository on October 16, it was later realized that this building immediately overlooked the route that Kennedy would take on his November 22 visit to Dallas. Oswald was now viewed as the perfect foil. And this from the DIA analysis. Oswald also was immediately connected.
Intimate.
I'm sorry, thank you. Oswald was also intimately connected with de Mohrenschildt, who was certainly known to be a CIA operative. Oswald's connection with this man were such as to guarantee that the CIA was aware of Oswald's movements throughout his residence in the Dallas area. When Oswald secured employment at the Texas Book Depository, de Mohrenschildt, according to an FBI report, reported this to the CIA, and that from the DIA analysis. Another quote, "The pseudo-defector Oswald became then important to the furtherance of the plan to kill the American president. He had strong connections with the Soviet Union. He had married a Soviet citizen. He had been noticed in public advocating support of Fidel Castro. His position in a tall building overlooking the parade route was a stroke of great good fortune to the plotters." And that from the Russian intelligence study.
I think this is a good point for me to just jump in on George de Mohrenschelt, who's been the subject of many of my minefields early on.
Yes.
He, of course, is the son of uh, the manager or president of the uh, Russian oil company that was running the Baku oil fields, which was, the biggest oil fields in the world and one of the great objects of World War II to conquer, to possess that. So to leave out that he was the son of this very, very important Russian, he's not a minor nobility at all. These people are from Minsk. And this is Belarus. This part of the Baltic. You could say he was a Baltic, but I think to say he was a Baltic is a little bit of disinformation that we should be suspicious of, and covering up his connection to his brother. Forget his first name, but the de Mohrenschelt taught at Loomis School, where my father went to school.
Wow.
He was 10 years before my dad, but he was the brother of George de Mohrenschelt. So to think that just happened to be that Mohrenschelt happened to meet Lee Harvey Oswald in connection with the Russian community in Texas, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's an awful lot of coincidences here that I think the author describes as great good fortune, but I don't know.
Does the author see everything? Did the author fail to notice that de Mohrenschelt was from the famous, I think it was Grenoble. It was the Nobel, it had the Nobel name, the same Nobel name that had the prize.
Oh,
Anyway, my memory is not totally clear on that, so we better move on.
okay. In the first week of November, the assassination team had been flown to Dallas and spent 2 weeks in reconnaissance of the entire presidential route. It had initially been felt by the Corsican team leader that the shooting could be done as the cavalcade turned from Houston to Elm Streets. The presidential car would be moving very slowly as it negotiated the right angle turn and would present an excellent target. A shooting blind could be constructed on the top of the Dallas County Records building on Houston Street that had an excellent line of sight to the Elm Street corner. But flanking buildings were higher and could provide an undesired observer a clear view of the shooters. It was finally decided to use the book depository as one base. The railroad overpass was considered another excellent position, but eventually ruled out because it was sure to be guarded. To its right, however, the heavy bushes and fences of the elevated grassy knoll proved to be irresistible. The official car with the president would be moving slowly past the spot and would permit a slightly downhill shot at very close range. Also, the extensive railroad yards behind this position gave ample room for an unobserved escape. The final disposition of the assassination team was a shooter in the Texas Book Depository, 6th floor, a shooter in the ornamental bushes just before the underpass, 2 English-speaking personnel in suits and equipped with false law enforcement identification in the railroad yard behind the second shooter. It was later reported that if anyone tried to investigate or interfere with the escape of the shooter, the 2 faux law enforcement agents would be able to display their identification and deflect pursuit. Through his friendship with Oswald, de Mohrenschildt was aware that Oswald had bought a rifle from Klein's Sporting Goods through the mail in March of that year. Both Oswald and his wife had mentioned this rifle to de Mohrenschildt, and he also learned where the weapon was kept. And this from the DIA document. The existence and location of Oswald's mail-ordered Mannlicher Carcano. Did I say that right? Mannlicher Carcano?
Mannlicher Carcano.
Mannlicher Carcano rifle in the garage of his wife's friend, Ruth Payne, was also known to de Mohrenschildt at least 1 week prior to the assassination.
Now, here's my question. Why did Oswald order a rifle, a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, from what was it, Sears Roebuck or something,
Klein Sporting Goods, through
and
the mail,
through the mail
Yeah.
under an assumed name. He used A.J. Heidel as the name. That's a question I don't know the answer to. Why did he order it? Did somebody higher than him in his chain of command just tell him order this, and he did it? That's most likely, I think. Somebody told him to.
Right, because at that point, he was in contact with the FBI, I believe. Because when he came back after being a defector,
Yeah.
he did continue to, he came back on the understanding, they allowed him back in, that he would be an agent and a double agent.
Okay.
Moving on with the text of the book. Oswald was a bad shot with a rifle. The Warren Commission report to the contrary, and had never even test shot this surplus Mannlicher Carcano Italian Army weapon. Stories about him going to Dallas rifle ranges with others and firing the Carcano were total fabrications, as was an accepted tale of him driving a car. Oswald had never shot the purported murder weapon, possessed no driver's license, and did not know how to drive any kind of car. On September 26, Oswald went to Mexico City by bus. He returned to Dallas on October 3rd. During this period, the official story is that Oswald went to the Soviet and Cuban embassies and made very vocal attempts to secure visas for trips to Russia via Cuba. He was told, the official version explains, that a visa to go to Soviet Russia would take 4 months to process, and the Cubans would not grant a visa for Cuba without a Soviet visa. After the assassination, the CIA sent out a number of reports to various American agencies containing their version of the Oswald visit, to include physical descriptions and photographs. All of this material was totally incorrect, and the person depicted was very obviously not Lee Harvey Oswald. What Oswald did while in Mexico is not known, but a CIA report of his dramatic visits to 2 other embassies is a deliberate falsehood. And this quote from the Russian intelligence study: Oswald was then reported by the CIA to have gone to Mexico City on 26 September 1963, and while there, drew considerable attention to his presence in both the Soviet and Cuban embassies. What Oswald might have done in the Cuban embassy is not known for certain, but there is no record of his ever having visited the Soviet embassy in Mexico at that time. CIA physical descriptions as well as photographs show that Oswald was not the man depicted. This appears strongly to be a poor attempt on the part of the CIA to embroil both the Soviet Union and Cuba in their affairs. And then this from the DIA analysis. Reports from the CIA concerning Oswald's September-October visit to Mexico City are totally unreliable and were rejected by the FBI as being, quote, in serious error, end quote. The reason for Oswald's visit to Mexico are completely obscure at this writing, but the individual allegedly photographed by the CIA surveillance in Mexico is, to a certainty, not Lee Oswald. As the CIA had pictures of the real Oswald, their reasons for producing such an obvious falsity are not easy to ascertain at this remove. Moving on with the text. The famous Mexican trip was a typical official red herring deliberately dragged across the investigative trail. In point of fact, it matters not what Oswald did while in Mexico, because this trip had no possible bearing on the allegations of assassination heaped onto dead Oswald. The patently obviously disinformation put out by the CIA about Oswald's visit either indicates a frantic desire to be current with intelligence matters, or, in a more sinister interpretation, a crude attempt to somehow link the assassination to the Soviet Union and Cuba via the predetermined assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Had this course been followed during the sittings of the Warren Commission, it might well have forced the timid new president to make accusations against both Russia and Cuba that could quite conceivably lead to armed conflict. Since this is the one thing that Johnson frantically wished to avoid, the Mexico City visitation was relegated to the oblivion of the Warren Commission report without official attention, but certainly deserving of the subsequent sarcasm from a legion of anti-establishment historians. Kennedy was shot on Friday, November 22, 1963. Oswald was shot on Sunday, November 24, 1963. Chicago Mafia leader Sam Giancana was shot to death in the basement of his home in June of 1975, prior to when he was supposed to appear before a congressional committee. Oswald's CIA connection in Dallas, George de Mohrenschildt, is alleged to have shot himself just prior to his scheduled appearance before a congressional committee in March of 1977. Arranging a murder is relatively simple, but arranging a suicide is much more difficult. The Warren Commission was instituted shortly after the Dallas murders. Evidence was gathered and presented to the commission, and a final report was duly released. Predictably, it named Lee Harvey Oswald as the sole assassin and further carefully played down the strong connections his killer, Jack Rubenstein, which is Jack Ruby, had with the Chicago mob. Historians have discussed the number of witnesses who died in the following months and years. The number tends to raise suspicions of foul play, but so far, no hard evidence of a concerted effort to silence witnesses has been produced. Considering the vast extent of the conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy and overthrow his administration, the conclusions are more than obvious. The Warren Report included a number of issues intended to bolster their case against Oswald. One was the attempt to shoot General Edwin Walker, a retired right-wing professional Army officer resident in Dallas, on April 12, 1963. That Oswald had nothing to do with this incident is obvious from examining the published evidence and investigative reports. The general was shot by a .30-06 rifle. Eyewitnesses all agreed that two dark-complexioned men were seen driving away from the scene. Oswald did not own such a gun, was not dark-complexioned, and did not drive. The Walker story was supplied by Oswald's terrified widow, who desperately was attempting to avoid being sent back to Russia. She spoke no English and, in general, did what she was told. Her story of the Walker incident has no value whatsoever and could never have been used in a court of law.
That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me that she was pressured to say that, because the famous doctored picture with him holding a rifle, which has been proven to be also a fake, it's all part of the setup to make it look like Lee Harvey Oswald was, in fact, a Soviet and or Cuban agent. But all of it, it's all just paper thin.
Yep. Of the four Corsicans, 3 vanished from the face of the earth after being escorted to a private plane at a Dallas area airfield about 2:30 on the afternoon of November 22nd. They were accompanied by Mr. Bowman and were informed they would be flown first to New Orleans, where the pilot, David Ferry, was based, and thence to a safe house in Maryland. From the moment they climbed into the 2-engine aircraft, they were never seen again. One of the assassins, the man who fired at Kennedy from nearly point-blank range and blew out the presidential brains, decided to work his way back to Marseille on his own. For some unknown reason, he took a commercial bus to Mexico, and from there, he ended up in Barcelona, Spain. All that is known of him is the name he used on his passport, Guidobaldo Fini.
Okay, I got to jump in here because in an earlier edition of Undo the Coup, we played some recordings of James Files, who claims to have been the man in the grassy knoll, the man who delivered the headshot. Now, here we have an interesting question. Was Files
Feeney.
covering up? Well, was Files covering up for this Corsican?
Oh,
You know, in other words, if I was running the cover up, I wouldn't want this Corsican to be exposed. But clearly, the author Douglas and probably Robert Crowley had knowledge of who these Corsicans were. And of course, it's Benjamin Bauman who is taking these other three on the plane where they were never seen again, the Israeli agent from Shin Bet.
mm-hmm.
So there's another mystery. There's so many mysteries. But I'll tell you, when I watched James Files, right before he died, that one, it's hard not to believe him. So maybe there's an explanation that includes both of these assassins, but I think it's important for us to make a footnote here that, we don't know the answer, but that's the evidence we have so far.
Well, I can't help but note the similarity of the names, Geobaldo Feeney, James Files.
Okay.
Moving on, these quotes from the Russian intelligence study first and then the DIA analysis. It is understood that the actual assassins were subsequently removed in a wet action, but that one apparently escaped and has been the object of intense searches in France and Italy by elements of the CIA. That from the Russian intelligence study. And then the DIA analysis says, the hit team was flown away in an aircraft piloted by a CIA contract pilot named David Ferry from New Orleans. They subsequently vanished without a trace. Rumors of the survival of one of the team are persistent, but not proven. And that from the DIA.
It's in 1978 in the memo that we can't get a hold of.
Right.
But it's quoted in its entirety in the book. It's another good reason to, just read the book, read Regicide. It's full of very, very important clues, if not a conclusion. And I think it's darn conclusive.
Yes. Moving on with the text. There was one other murder that bears directly on the Kennedy assassination. On October 12, 1964, shortly after noon, Mary Pinchot Meyer, 44, former wife of Cord Meyer, Jr., the senior CIA official, was found shot to death in a wooded area near her Georgetown studio. She had been shot once in the head and once in the upper body, a professional technique of assassination. A dazed black day laborer was found in the vicinity by police, and although not matching the description of an eyewitness, was arrested and put on trial for murder. The suspect, Ray Crump, had no coherent statement for the police at the time of his arrest, and an intensive search of the area failed to locate the handgun used in the killing. This, in spite of the fact that the suspect was apprehended in the immediate area of the killing. Period press reports indicate that a large number of CIA personnel were present immediately after the discovery of the body. Crump was acquitted at his subsequent trial. The prosecution depicted him as a rapist, but he had no record of such offenses. He had been seen waiting on a Washington Street corner for day labor prior to being found in a dazed condition on the towpath near Mary Meyer's body. Her husband, Cord Meyer, Jr., was a close personal friend of James Angleton and a very bitter enemy of John Kennedy. Meyer's intense hatred of Kennedy was due to the attentions that Kennedy had once paid to his ex-wife. In point of fact, Mary Pinchot Meyer had been Kennedy's long-term mistress subsequent to her divorce from her husband. Mrs. Meyer had introduced LSD to the president during her many visits to the White House.
Isn't that just extraordinary?
Yes.
To think that and this has been confirmed by other writers that she obviously had some connection to the CIA's Sidney Gottlieb and the MK Ultra and the whole process of using drugs to create a blackmail so that to convince Kennedy that, oh, you got to do LSD. It's the best sex in the world, right? And so he does it, and then they take some pictures, and they own him. Did that happen? Well, we don't know for sure.
It is interesting.
But to think that anybody that was the president of the United States would expose themselves to such blackmail so easily is hard to believe.
It's that fascination with his zipper.
That's the zipper ants. The zip, yeah. So let's keep going.
Immediately after her murder, Crowley associate James Angleton was caught in her Georgetown studio going through her papers. He later removed her diary and kept it. Robert Crowley, who saw it, stated that it contained a significant number of references to her connection with Kennedy, the use of drugs at the White House sex parties, and some very bitter comments about the role of her former husband's agency in the death of her lover the year before. Mary Meyer had made angry and indiscreet comments about her views on her suspicions of CIA involvement in the Kennedy killings to a number of her neighbors, a significant number of whom had husbands that were senior CIA officials. This murder is still listed as unsolved, and the police records have disappeared. Shortly after her murder, her bitter former husband painted Tough Luck Mary on the Key Bridge near the site of her death. John Kennedy may have been a charismatic man, but neither he nor his family could be considered either ethical or moral. The president and his brother, the Attorney General of the United States, repeatedly betrayed their wives, their criminal associates, their loyal Cuban supporters, and many others with alacrity when it suited them to do so. According to the CIA, the FBI, the vice president, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they also betrayed important intelligence secrets to the Soviet Union for political gain. Hence, John F. Kennedy had to die. And this quote, "This removal of JFK is the result of a consensus between the various concerned official agencies." And that summarizes so much. Another quote, "From this brief study, it may be seen that the American president was certainly killed by orders of high officials in the CIA, working in close conjunction with very high American military leaders. It was the CIA belief that Kennedy was not only circumventing their own mapped-out destruction of Fidel Castro by assassination and invasion, but actively engaged in contacts with the Soviet Union to betray CIA actions. The American military leaders, known as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were also determined upon the same goals. Hence, both of them worked together to ensure the removal of a president who acted against their best interests and to have him replaced with a weaker man whom they believed they could better control. President Johnson, Kennedy's successor, was very much under the control of the military and CIA during his term of office and permitted an enormous escalation in Southeast Asia. The destruction of the communist movement in that area was of paramount importance to both groups. That from the Russian intelligence study. Also, the Soviet analysis of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy contains material gleaned from American sources, both official and unofficial, i.e., media coverage, etc. Some of this material obviously stems from sources located inside various agencies. To date, none of these have been identified. And that from the Russian intelligence study, then from the DIA analysis. A study of the Soviet report indicates very clearly that the Russians have significant and very high-level sources within both the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their possession of material relating to certain highly classified American military papers has been referred to the CIC for investigation and action. And that was DIA analysis. And that's the end of the chapter.
Well, there's the coup. The collusion of the principal government agencies had to happen, or there's no way that anybody could get away with assassinating the president of the United States. There's just no way. I don't care if he was a lone nut. No way. And I really do think Fletcher Prouty is a very good source on this. His book about the assassination of JFK. He wrote two very important books. The Secret Team is number one, and everyone should be very, very aware of that book. And then the second one is his book on JFK, the assassination of the president, in which I think everything pretty well dovetails with this without Prouty coming out and saying it. It dovetails very well with this. And I also believe the Torbett document has a lot of resonance with this. People have rushed to discredit the Torbett document, saying, oh, it's just something that, appeared in a mimeograph, and it's not, this is not, I don't know, man. When you think about the agencies involved and the narrative presented, let's just not get lost in the details. How much does it really matter if it was a Corsican or if it was James Files? Okay. These things will drag this thing out forever, and have. But what we need to do is to get the Congress to, and Representative Luna, I hope that you will take this up if no one else does, to actually look into these documents that are referenced in the book Regicide, the DIA analysis, the Russian intelligence analysis, and Robert Crowley's memos and notes.
Absolutely.
These things have got to be either verified or discredited before this country can move on. It's as simple as that. Right now we have an attempt to call what's happened to President Trump in the previous election treason. And can they, was the Democratic leadership commit treason in subverting the people's will in the election? And there's an awful lot of evidence of that. But unless we go back and undo the coup of 1963, these things are just going to keep on happening as one side
That's right.
against the other side. And instead of being a republic based on the Constitution, we become another oligarchy that changes government by assassination and not by the vote of the citizens of the country.
And I'd like to add that the author of this book, Gregory Douglas, there is a chapter where he talks about efforts to silence those who expose these things. And he specifically references Gary Webb, which absolutely fascinated me. And, Gary Webb was the journalist in the Sacramento Bee who exposed the connection between the not cocaine, but what's the other drug? The oh my gosh, I'm totally drawing a blank. Anyway, the connection between some of the drugs that were dumped in the Los Angeles area and the arms, the Iran-Contra scandal and all of that, and the arms and the drugs and the people who were CIA supported. And he did this wonderful investigative journalism and won a Pulitzer Prize. And then suddenly everybody turned against him, especially the journalism community. His employers turned against him. They all started shunning him and ridiculing him and accusing him, I guess, of making up information.
Mm-hmm.
His family, he lost his wife and children. His life fell apart. And then he eventually was found dead of a, quote, suicide, where he shot himself in the head twice. I still find that shocking. But anyway, and the author of this book, Douglas, does not go into that much detail. I just wanted to provide that as background because Gary Webb's story is chilling.
Yeah.
And and Douglas talks about the fact that anybody who exposes this kind of information is ultimately either shunned or killed or discredited or ignored, which this book has been ignored because, as you and I have found, I really wanted to go onto the internet and find documents, stories, writing that did discredit, so that I could get a sense of, how true is this? And there's nothing out there, nothing. This book has been totally and completely ignored. And I just find that, all right, call me naive. I find that shocking.
Well, it's out of the memory hole now here at Macduff Lives, and that's what we're going to keep doing here with the Undo the Coup series. I have a number of thoughts for the next few shows on Undo the Coup, but I'm not stopping, folks. We're going to keep going and try to convince enough people to get this congressional committee together and undo this damn coup so that we can possibly put back together the republic that we're supposed to have. And I think that's enough for today.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Marcia, thank you for your wonderful reading.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to sit here and just listen to the resonance of your voice. So thanks, everybody. And I'll be back tomorrow with our good friend Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche and Schiller organization. So join us at 11 a.m. tomorrow Eastern Time for another edition of Harley and Me.